Good evening. My name is Steve Feiner, and it's my pleasure to welcome you to the last session of the day on perception and interaction with hands and cues. We have four great papers, 15 minutes, 12 minutes of a presentation, and 3 minutes, we hope, of questions for each one of them. And the first one is on adaptive hand visibility for accurate 3D user interactions in virtual environments, and it'll be presented by Rumeysa Turkmen.
So, hello everyone. I'm Rumeysa, a second-year PhD student at Concordia University. Today I'll be presenting our paper titled Adaptive Hand Visibility for Accurate 3D User Interactions in Virtual Environments. As we humans primarily interact with the physical world through our hands, virtual hand avatars play a crucial role bridging the gap between physical and virtual experiences. Unlike VR controllers, which cannot accurately replicate the real hand movements, virtual hand avatars allow users to intuitively grasp, move, or manipulate objects in a way closely resembling the real-world interactions. However, for the tasks that require fine motor skills, such as grasping some small object, those kind of tasks depend heavily on the fine hand movements, which are like small finger movements rather than the gross motor skills. So for this task, designing effective hand avatar visualizations are important for intuitive interactions. There are some commonly used hand visibilities which are opaque, transparent, and invisible, and each of them has some advantages and disadvantages. For instance, opaque hands provide complete spatial feedback to the users regarding their hand position. However, it occludes with the interacted objects, which can cause the distraction. Transparent hands provide pass-through, which you can see your hands and the object, but still can cause distraction as it partially occludes with the object. And the invisible hands fully eliminates the occlusion, but this time users lost their spatial feedback about their hand positions. So for the precise task that requires higher precision, we should consider new hand visibilities. Previous work investigated effect of those three hand visibilities in the task called Purdy pegboard test. The results not only showed that different hand visibilities affect user performance, they also found that the effect of subtasks, which are reaching, grasping, transporting, and inserting. In their follow-up study, they investigated users' gaze behavior during the interaction, again with those three hand visibilities, and they found that participants' visual attention shifted based on the subtask. So in our study, we implemented VR-based pedicle screw placement. It's a commonly used procedure in spinal surgery where accuracy is really critical. We chose this task because it requires really high precision, and in this study our aim is not to investigate this in a medical perspective. Instead, as this task requires really high precision, that's the reason that we implemented this task in VR. So we propose to use two adaptive hand visibilities. First one is position-based and the other is speed-based. Position-based hand visibility depends on hand proximity. It's about if we know the location of the hands and the interactive objects in the 3D scenes, we propose to use position-based. On the other hand, speed-based hand visibility adjusted based on the hand speed and whether user is holding an object or not. In the position base, the colliders can be added around the interactive objects and hands during the inserting movement, which the hands is closer to the interactive object, the hands starting becoming invisible. And in the speed base, this is the decision tree. I will just give an example. For instance, if the user is holding an object and the speed is lower than the adjusted threshold, the hands become invisible because this refers the inserting movement. So this is our user study. During the reaching subtask, we designed hands are opaque, fully opaque. When the user start the grasping movement, the hands become transparent. During the transporting, it stays transparent, and when the inserting movement starts, it's become invisible. We compared our 2 adaptive hand visibilities with 3 existing visibilities, which are opaque, transparent, and invisible hands in our study, and we used the pedicle screw placement task, where user needs to reach, grasp, transport, and insert the object as fast and as accurate as possible. Our first hypothesis is whether the adaptive hand visibilities can improve user performance, and the second one is about the user experience. Our performance results show that invisible, position-based, and speed-based hand visibilities resulted faster completion time compared to opaque, and 3 of them resulted shorter path lengths, which shows the efficient movement. The path lengths refer that. And lastly, those 3 hand visibilities again, including invisible and adaptive hand visibilities that we propose, reduce the movement time compared to opaque. Movement downtime refers to the participants had less corrective movements during the whole interaction. And in terms of accuracy, here we only recorded during the inserting subtask, and it shows how accurately placed the screw compared to the highlighted target area. And again, invisible, position-based, and speed-based resulted smaller error angles, which shows the better accuracy compared to opaque. And only position-based resulted closer targets placements compared to opaque. In our subjective feedbacks, we received a mixed feedback. For instance, 40% of the participants, I think 6 out of 15 participants preferred position-based the most. 67% of the participants rated opaque as the last preference, and almost 27% of the participants rated invisible as the last preference. Although invisible hands performed slightly good compared to opaque hand, similar to the position-based and speed-based hand visibilities, but in our subjective feedback, it rated second last choice. But in our SUS scores, it received again excellent grade, and also position-based and speed-based. We believe this is because participants found it usable, but they just don't prefer to use it. And position-based outperformed almost each metric that we evaluated. As a discussion, based on our findings, we identify key takeaways for designing effective hand interactions in VR. First, hand visibility shouldn't be static for the precise tasks. Each phase of interaction, reaching, grasping, transporting, and inserting benefits from different visibility levels. For example, during inserting task, occlusion of the hands and the object really reduce the performance. So more transparent on invisible hands are performed better. Second one, the right adaptive method depends on the task context. If the system doesn't know where the interactive objects are, we suggest using speed-based visibility. And if the objects are predefined in the 3D environment, we suggest using position-based visibility. Finally, the static visualizations such as opaque hands, which are still widely used in many virtual reality applications, can significantly reduce the performance. And our findings suggest that designers should also consider the adaptive hand visibilities, but our results only applicable for the precise task that requires fine motor skills. We did not investigate in the gross movements. So as a conclusion, we investigated adaptive hand visibility techniques that we call speed-based and position-based. They mostly work similar. The only difference is during the each subtask, one of them depends on the position of the hand and interactive objects, and other depends on the hand speed. And our results demonstrated that adaptive hand visibilities improve both user performance and experience compared to opaque hands. Thank you for listening.
Thank you very much, Ramesa. And we have time for questions right now. So please ask away. Have any questions? Okay, while you're thinking of questions, I have a question.
Yeah.
And that's that you were basically making the entire hand either invisible or transparent or opaque. Have you thought about options of making maybe only a part of the hand? Maybe for certain tasks you want to see some of the hand, but maybe not the rest of the hand. Have you thought about doing something like that?
Like in terms of like part of the hands, or I don't
So
get.
not so much like cutting your fingers off, but maybe if there is some part of the hand that's covering, let's say, the
Oh,
screw,
like the
right?
fingers.
Make that part
Yeah.
invisible, but make the rest visible.
Mhm.
Because maybe there might be some tasks in which you really do want to see the
Yeah,
rest of the hand.
that might be good future direction. Yeah.
Right. Like if you're trying to avoid a structure that you needed to know what your hands are going to touch or not, for example.
Also, during the pilot studies,
Mhm.
we observed that sudden changes of the hand visibilities also affect users.
Uh-huh.
So we like gradually reduce the
right.
visibility of the hands.
That sounds good.
Yeah.
Surely there's, okay, yes, please.
Oh, thank you for your excellent presentation. I think my question is similar to his, but I think the virtual hand you used in the experiment was kind of a 2D textured, a shadow kind of type, I think.
No, actually, it was the default hand visualization
that
that the
one.
Meta offers.
I was just wondering, what if the texture was more realistic, like real skin kind of design, or maybe a really simple 2D poly-shaped hand? What do you think that kind of difference would have made different outcomes?
For this kind of, thank you for your question. For this kind of task, maybe not. It's because I didn't put on the slides, but you can check the paper. We also evaluated all the subtasks and the interactions. We did not much observe difference during the reaching subtask that we use opaque hands only in that. So I'm not sure, but it can be a future direction as well. Thank you.
All right, yeah. Welcome, everybody. My name is Jakob Hartbrich from RWTH Aachen in Germany, and I present a paper about the effect of hand visibility in augmented reality, comparing dexterity and interaction with virtual and real objects. As a motivation, there's quite a lot of studies also mentioned in the previous talks that compare different hand visibilities in virtual reality. For example, here they came to the conclusion that no hand visuals led to the lowest task performance in virtual reality in this selection task. Here they compared different hand length, basically, with the arm or the whole arm or just the hand, where the hand only and hand plus forearm were faster than the whole arm for selection tasks. But then there were also typing performance tests where basically the no hand visualization condition performed worse overall. And then another comparison again with these three hand transparencies: opaque, transparent, and invisible. But here the invisible hand seen on the right side in the picture, basically you saw your hand until you grabbed the object, and then the hand turned invisible. So that's a little bit the difference. And here they came to the conclusion that invisible or transparent hands improve the speed and reduce the collisions compared to the opaque hand, because obviously you can see better if you don't have any hand visualization in your way. And then again, the same paper basically, also saying that low opacity hands or no hand visualizations are improving fine motor tasks. But overall, no studies have yet explored hand-object interaction between real and virtual objects in augmented reality, and that's where our study comes in. So we used basically augmented reality, and we used three different hand visibilities. Again, invisible, transparent, and opaque. And we used two different interaction modes, real and virtual objects, because we are in video pass through augmented reality. We also used two different tasks, a building block task and a hotwire task. I will come to this in a moment. And we measured the task completion time, object displacement, number of collisions, then the sense of agency scale, and some custom questions. So coming to the tasks, we set up basically an identical setup of real and virtual objects. So we had exactly the same 3D printed components for the real objects compared to the virtual objects. And the first task was basically a building block task where you were required to pick up these blocks that you see on the table. And then on the right side, you see this target template. And the task was basically pick up these blocks, put them on the target template as fast and as accurately as possible. And you had the stop and start timer at on the left side. And then we had this hotwire game, which is also known for as a children's game, basically, where you have this hot wire and you need to pick up like a ring and feed it from the right side to the left side as fast as possible with the least amount of touches. And whenever you touch the wire with the ring that you are holding, basically, it will make a beeping sound. So here we see it in action, just a few snippets basically showing the different hand visibilities and the different real and virtual objects. And as you saw in the setup here already, we have this scanner built into the table because for the building block task, we want to measure the displacement of the objects, how accurately the people place the targets. So for the virtual case, we can just take a virtual screenshot. And for the real tasks, we took a scanner image, basically. And here you see basically the target template, and then you see the green blocks, basically, that we then use to basically calculate the object displacement. So, as an overview for this study, it took roughly 60 minutes per participant. We had 28 participants, and yeah, they basically did a pre-test with a short introduction, then a training task. The training task was only focused on the actual virtual reality interaction, so only the virtual cubes, because that is the most difficult part to know how to grab virtual objects. And everybody has picked up any real object, so there's no difference or need in training that. And then it was a within subject design, so every participant tried out all combinations between the three different hand visualizations and the two different interaction modes. And then we also had as a last interaction, or like last condition, basically a baseline condition, so no HMD at all and just the real objects. Everybody repeated each task 2 times, and then we just took the mean of it, and all the conditions were counterbalanced. Coming to the results, looking at the task completion time, we see that for the building blocks task and the hotwire task, basically there was only a significant difference between the real and the virtual objects. So basically, as expected, kind of, we know or we handle real objects most of the time, and handling virtual objects is more difficult or more finicky. So the task's completion time will take longer in this regard. But there were no other significant interaction effects, just a tendency basically for the building blocks task where the invisible hand took longer than the transparent or opaque one. Looking at the percentage of this object displacement, we see a similar thing again. This is now just for the building block task. Again, just a significant difference between the real and the virtual objects, but no difference or no significant difference between the hand visualizations. Then coming to the number of collisions during the hotwire task, we have again the real and virtual object discrepancies, but now we also have this interaction effect basically for the real objects and the interaction mode. So we see that the opaque hand for the real objects took significantly or caused significantly more number of collisions compared to the transparent and the invisible ones. And this was mostly because also participants replied that yeah, they saw the virtual hand and it was occluding their view, and it was like kind of a fine motor task, and you needed to really see where the ring is and where the wire is, and this caused more collisions. Looking at the agency, we have two subscales. We have on the left the SOPA, sense of positive agency, and on the right the sense of negative agency. And here again, we see the differences between real and virtual objects, but also again, yeah, the difference between the invisible hand and the opaque hand, where the opaque hand had a significant lower sense of positive agency when interacting with real objects. And this is also basically in this other study, they said that competing visual stimuli may reduce the sense of agency. So we come to a similar conclusion here. Yeah, looking at the custom questions, we use these three different questions. And here again, we see for each of them the difference between real and virtual objects. But here we again see similar yeah, interaction effects, again between for how easy was it to interact with this visibility. We see yeah, the opaque hand, it was more difficult to interact with the real objects compared to the invisible one. How successful did the people feel when interacting with these hands? We see again that the opaque hand compared to the invisible and transparent hand, yeah, scored lowest. And then for the awkwardness when using this hand visibility, we again see, okay, it was the most awkward to use this opaque hand handling real objects, but here again we also see the first time a significant differences for the interaction with virtual objects. So the invisible hand basically felt most awkward compared to, or significantly more awkward than the transparent or the opaque hand in the virtual object mode. So we also collected some written feedback and preferences where people basically said, okay, for real object, it was easy to interact with them. It felt natural, which is kind of expected. And for virtual objects, yeah, they lack feedback and are very finicky to handle. And it often requires multiple attempts to get the outcome that they wanted, which is also kind of expected because sometimes the hand tracking, you need to know how to handle these virtual objects. Comments regarding the different hand transparencies, people said for the invisible hand, for example, I feel my own hands are more, more and have more control over things when interacting with real objects. So in the case where you are interacting with real objects, the invisible hand is preferred basically, as we saw also in the previous slides. For the transparent hand, people like that they see this mismatch between the real and the virtual hand. And they kind of felt that it's like awkward to use, but still easy to use. And then for the opaque hand, as I already mentioned, the visualization was blocking their vision, but it was also for handling like virtual objects. They could better focus on the digital hands and therefore made the interaction more easy. Then we also asked the participants to rank all these 7 conditions. Yeah, here on the lowest side, basically we see that the no HMD condition scored best because the lowest number in this case is the best. And then we see first the 3 real conditions and then the 3 virtual conditions. So concluding, overall participants were faster and more precise manipulating the real objects versus the virtual ones. Invisible hands improved the performance for real object manipulation, so fewer errors, higher agency, and greater ease and perceived success. And transparent or opaque virtual hands are preferred when handling the virtual objects, despite no significant performance gains. So overall, no visual hand representations can enhance the real object interaction. Virtual hand visualization aids virtual object manipulation as an internal reference, and virtual hand visuals may introduce redundant information and highlight mismatches between the real and the virtual environments. Thank you for your attention, and I'm happy to answer some questions.
Okay, thank you, Jakob. We have time for one very quick question. No one? Going once, twice.
I guess I'll ask a question
Okay,
if
good.
it's okay.
Yeah.
I noticed the hand didn't have any like texture, and I guess this goes back to the
Yeah.
question that was asked in the previous presentation as well. But I'm wondering, do you think that there would be any differences if there was a texture applied to the hand, like a skin texture or something like that?
I mean, I think it's similar to the first presentation now, that I think the hand texture in this case doesn't make much of a difference because it's mostly about like fine motor skills or fine manipulation tasks. So if you have a mismatch between the virtual and the real hand, for example, then it's still occluding your view, even though it has a different texture. So in this case, it probably doesn't make much of a difference, but probably the embodiment or sense of agency might be, yeah,
Thanks. Thank you.
happened. Yeah. All right. Thank you.
Thank you. Okay.
Okay. Thank you for the introduction, Dr. Piner. I'll jump right in. So, body-based scaling is a perceptual mechanism where the human body, particularly familiar body parts like the hands, is used as a reference framework to estimate and interpret the size of objects in the environment. This phenomenon becomes especially relevant in XR contexts, where self-avatar representations, such as virtual hands, interact with virtual objects. A plethora of previous research has shown that when these virtual hands or their variations engage with objects, body-based scaling may occur, causing the objects to be perceived differently based on the size of the virtual hands. However, they do not clearly state how the visibility of body-scaled hand avatars affect size perception. Motor experiences, another aspect in size perception, provide haptic information even when the environment is not visible. A size perception task in most of the previous VR studies consisted of perceiving an object when a condition was applied and then capturing the perceived size through a passive task where no manipulation was made. This made us wonder and ask, what would happen if reporting of the size was considered an active task and conditions are manipulated during that task too? These gaps led us to ask an overarching research question: how does self-avatar hand visibility, absent or present, affects near-field size perception of tangible graspable objects when the size perception and the size reporting are investigated as two separate phases of a size perception task in virtual reality. Our first hypothesis focused on perception phase with an expectation of better size perception with visible hand avatars. Similarly, second hypothesis focused on reporting phase with an expectation of better size perception with visible hand avatars. And the third hypothesis considered perception and reporting phase together with better size perception expectation when hand avatars were visible in both the phases and worst size perception when hand avatars were absent in both the phases. From a second person's view, perception was set up on the left and opposite to it was the reporting on the right. After perceiving the graspable object, the participant rotated on their left to report the perceived size. They rotated on their right to perceive the next graspable object. Perception and reporting phases were within subjects, and the condition combinations were between subjects. For hand avatar visibility manipulation, in the first condition, hand avatars were not visible in both the phases. In the second condition, hand avatars were visible only in the perception phase. In third condition, hand avatars were visible only in the reporting phase. And in the fourth condition, hand avatars were visible in both the phases. The virtual environment was aligned as close to the physical environment as possible. The left video shows the perception phase when the hand avatars are not visible. Similarly, the right video shows the perception phase when the hand avatars are visible. To report the perceived size, a circle capturing the diameter was drawn on the Microsoft Studio touchscreen. Here, we have left video showing the reporting phase with hand avatar absent condition. And the right video showing the reporting phase with hand avatar present condition. Here we have a video of a full trial with hand avatar absent in the perception phase and present in the reporting phase. We collected reported size as objective measures and derived sign residual error, which is reported minus actual, and sign proportional error, which is reported minus actual divided by actual and multiplied by 100%. For subjective measures, we used Franco and Peck's embodiment questionnaire, which was on a 7-point scale. No significant result was found for this. We calculated 3 different linear mixed models for the objective measures. These models were first, the reported versus actual size. Then we had signed residual error, showing the error in standardized units, that is millimeter, and the signed proportional error that reflects the relation of the error to the actual size. 80 participants took part in the experiment, and every participant performed 48 trials. In the first hypothesis, we expected the perceived size to be more accurate if the hand avatars were present in the perception phase, and significant statistical results for the absent condition from the sign proportional error model showed that for every 1% increase in the object size, there was 0.07 increase in the perceived size. The same can be observed from the graph. This model showed that having no hand avatar during the tangible size perception would lead to more overestimation of the bigger graspable objects. Thus, full support was obtained from the sign proportional error model. However, the support was in reverse order, that is, lower accuracy for the absent condition. In the second hypothesis, we expected the perceived size to be more accurate if the hand avatars were present in the reporting phase. Significant statistical results from the signed proportional error model showed that for every 1% increase in the object size, there was a 0.13% decrease in the perceived size. The same can be observed from the graph. This suggests that having hand avatars would be better for better accuracy when the perceived size needs to be applied on some task. Thus, direct support was obtained from the signed proportional error model. Reported versus actual and the signed residual error models also fully supported hypothesis 2 in a similar manner, however, in the reverse order. In third hypothesis, we expected the accuracy to be the best when hand avatars were present in both the phases and worst when absent in both the phases. Significant statistical results for the congruent conditions, meaning either present in both the phases or absent in both the phases, from the signed proportional error model showed that as the trial progressed, for every 1% increase in the object size, there was 0.11% decrease in the perceived size. The same can be observed from the graph. This meant that if the hand avatar's visibility is congruent, the overestimation could be reduced and accuracy could be improved with more practice. As best or worst accuracy distinction couldn't be made for the present or the absent condition, congruent condition, only partial support was obtained for this hypothesis. Circling back to the research question, our study showed evidence that size perception of tangible graspable object is indeed influenced by the body-skilled hand avatar visibility when perception and reporting are investigated as separate phases. The results can be applied in the following manner. If the size information needs to be applied in a task, having hand avatars, at least in the reporting phase, would give better accuracy. When training involves tangible graspable objects, having consistent hand avatar visibility is recommended for better accuracy and improved learning. We would like to acknowledge Clemson University, Virtual Environment Group, and National Science Foundation for supporting this work. And I thank the audience for their kind attention, and I welcome any question that anyone might have.
Thank you very much, Shani, and we have plenty of time for questions. Questions? So while we're waiting for folks in the audience to come up with questions, I'll ask one. So this is a rigid plastic thingy that's driving the Microsoft dial, right?
Yes, the dial comes along with the Microsoft Surface,
Right, I
and it is
understand.
connected with an OSC system.
Yep.
And all the three devices are interacting with each other.
Right.
So whatever interaction is happening, the system collects all the data.
Right.
From
So
that,
I was
yeah.
going to ask,
Yeah.
what if instead of it being this rigid plastic, non-squeezable dial, it was something a little more smushy? Do you think you might get different results? A physically
I
kind of
think-
soft, cushiony kind of squishy dial.
I think it will give a better accuracy result because, and also it also depends on the question that you might be asking.
Okay.
So that if you have a squishiness included in it, you're
Yeah.
increasing the motor experiences
Mhm.
when you are having the task apply, making the
Mhm.
participant do the task. So
Yeah.
it's increasing the motor experiences.
Uh-huh.
So if you are asking what is the size when your fingers are most extended,
Mhm.
or to which extent you are able to squish it, I think the second question will have a variation depending on each person individual motor experiences.
Right.
But the first question, that what is the extent, the outer size, that should be better for all participants,
Right.
because the extension, the outer
Uh-huh.
size is constant, or like is
Sure, yeah.
for everyone same.
So I understand that depending on your strength, you might be able to
Yeah.
crush it, or you might be able to
Or to
just feel a little
destroy it.
squishy. So I was just wondering if it was something where you weren't asked to like really squeeze it as hard as you can, but just you reach out and touch it, and you can clearly tell it's a not really a rigid dial, right?
Okay.
Would that maybe make a difference in if you substituted that dial and tried the experiment all over again? Would you see it
Yes.
getting pretty much the same
I
result?
think
or
there will
different?
be a difference. Yeah,
Uh-huh.
there will be a difference. Yeah.
And what if the person were wearing a glove, for example? Sometimes, when it's cold outside, you might wear a glove, right?
If the object does not have a texture applied to it, like fine texture that
Mhm.
can be felt by your fingers,
Mhm.
then wearing a glove will not make a difference,
Mm-hmm. Okay.
because the motor experiences still continues to exist.
Right.
So yeah, having the participant wear a glove might not have a difference.
Because it seems to me maybe that if I had a big, thick glove on, like a winter
glove?
glove on,
Okay.
to keep my hands from getting really cold, I
Okay.
might have more trouble determining how
Yeah,
big
that
something
will
was.
affect the motor experiences, so that will impact the size perception.
It's for
Yeah.
the Arctic VR experience. So while we've been asking those questions, does anybody else have a question? No one? Good.
Okay, thank you for your presentation. Uh, I was just wondering that, let's say there are two people with the exact same eyes that shows exact same performance, but one person has shorter arms and one has longer arms. So basically, for that same eyes, the hand will be shown a different size depending on their length of their arms. So do you think those differences will make their reporting performance different as well, or do you think it will not matter?
It will not matter, because we use Quest 3 and we tested that the size, the hand avatar size was matching the size of their individual hands. So when an individual is working with their hands, they are well acquainted with their hands. So whatever task that they do with their hand, no matter where they take it, they know the size of their hand. So when they are interacting with the task and trying to perceive the size, whatever normal influence they have with their hands, it will exist in virtual reality also. So that should not impact if the hand avatars are scaled to the actual hands.
Okay.
Yeah.
Thank you,
Thank
Chandni.
Thank you.
All right. Hi, I'm Ryan McMahon, and on behalf of my co-authors, Xinyu Hu and Joe Laviola, I'm presenting MAGIC, a method for analyzing the grammar of incomplete cues. Full notice, we do not focus on hands in this research, but all right, so a little introduction here. So interaction cues are very common to AR and VR applications. They're basically used in many types of applications to indicate to the user what action they should take next. This is most often for like VR training applications or a tutorial. There's been lots of studies on interaction cues, such as what you should look at next or to guide your attention to a particular object. Sometimes to tell you what button to push in a UH-60 Black Hawk helicopter. These are just some pictures from some of the prior work on these studies. Now, aside from the numerous empirical studies that exist, there's only been a few frameworks or prior works that have looked at frameworks and taxonomies for describing these interaction cues. So Dillman et al. Presented one of the first taxonomies. They basically classified visual cues from a series of video games. Gattulo et al., they classified visual assets from different AR industry applications. Roth et al. Classified guidance cues for cinematic VR applications. Wertz et al. Classified cues from multiplayer games, and more recently, Merson et al. Presented a framework for classifying feed-forward cues for VR. But what's very important to note here is while there's many classifications for interaction cues, none of the prior literature or work has basically provided a method where you can analytically evaluate interaction cues for potential usability issues. So we came up with MAGIC, again, the method for analyzing the grammar of interaction cues. So we're actually going to look at some grammatical sentences here. So first, you're going to define the interaction that the cue is supposed to cue to the user. We'll go through the details in a second. Once you define that text, you will then identify the semantic functional grammar roles within that text. We will then look at the shared interaction state to identify the key bits of information that both the user and the system share. We will then map the perceptual stimuli to those roles, and then we'll be able to assess for incomplete properties. So what might this look like? So let's assume that we have an AR application and we want the user to place a physical bowl on the table, okay? Usually with MAGIC, we express this through imperative sentences or commands. So the U is basically implied, so we would say something like place the bowl on the table. So again, the U is implied, so you place the bowl on the table. But what's very important here is MAGIC is robust. It can handle any type of variation of this text. So it doesn't have to be an imperative, it doesn't have to be a command. You could just simply express it as the user moves the dish in front of the end chair. Notice that several parts of this sentence has changed, but the underlying semantic meaning is the same. We're still trying to queue up the exact same interaction to the user. Once we basically have that text, the next thing that we want to do is identify the functional semantic grammar roles within that text. So taking you way back to your fundamentals of English, we're going to go over some of the basics here. So the subject for MAGIC is basically a noun phrase that indicates a user. The predicator is a verb phrase that indicates the action we want the user to take. The object is a noun phrase that indicates the entity that the subject is to act upon. And then we use the term modifier, which is basically any word or phrase that affects the meaning of the interaction. Now, if you go to grammar, their acronym is actually SPOCA, which they cover complements and adjuncts. However, we looked within the grammar literature, and basically some of the researchers said, hey, complements and adjuncts are a little difficult, so we use the modifier instead. So how does this get applied? So we go back to those texts that we basically defined for the interaction that we want the users to take. Obviously, you is the subject, place is the predicator, the bowl is the object, and on the table is the modifier. Now, very important to note here, notice our alternative text maps out exactly the same way. We still have the same semantic grammar roles, right? So we have a user, which is the subject, moves is the predicator, we have the dish now, which is the object, and this time the modifier is slightly a little bit more detailed, but it's still the modifier, so it's in front of the end chair, okay? The next thing we want to do, and I want to thank whoever our reviewers were, because it was through the revision process that we realized we needed to be more explicit about this, so we formally defined our shared interaction state. This is basically a set of information available to both the user and the system about what led up to the intended interaction and thus the interaction queue. So this includes information about recent interactions, their objects, their modifiers, what inputs the user has basically recently provided to the system, and what outputs the system has provided in return. So let's look at an example so that we can understand what a shared interaction state is. So let's assume that the user has just picked up this white physical bowl that you see, and this semi-transparent green virtual bowl has appeared. Okay, this is the shared interaction state. Both the user and the system are aware of this sequence of events. So now when we look back at our functional grammar roles, we can map the perceptual stimuli that were basically provided through this experience to the various roles, okay? So obviously, because the interaction cue appeared in response to the user acting, the user is clearly the subject here, okay? Because of the commonalities between the green bowl and the physical bowl, it should be pretty clear that basically the bowl is the thing that needs to be manipulated. So it's the semi-transparent green bowl that is cueing this, the object here. Because there are discrepancies between the position of the white bowl and the green bowl, it should be pretty intuitive to the majority of users that basically they need to be co-located, right? You need to move the white bowl to the green bowl. And then the position of the green bowl on the table basically cues up exactly where everything should go, okay? Now, let's consider an alternative example on how important the shared interaction state is. Let's assume that semi-transparent green bowl was already on the table before the user picked up the white bowl. All of a sudden, the entire interaction context has changed. It is no longer clear that the user is the subject of the interaction. Perhaps a user behind them picked up a bowl and that's why it appeared. Or perhaps anyone who comes along could be the user, right? It is also no longer clear what the object should be. It is not necessarily clear that that white bowl is the object that we want the user to act upon. Maybe there's a green bowl within the room that they need to go find, and that's what they should act upon. And then therefore, because the object is no longer clear, the predicator is also no longer clear. The only thing that remains here in terms of what is clear is that the position of the green bowl is indicating something about the interaction, right? It's modifying the interaction itself. Now, what's very important here, because we have three ambiguous things, I want to point out that we now have three incomplete contexts, okay, or three incomplete things that this particular interaction cue is no longer conveying. And so this leads very naturally to us defining 5 completeness properties. We have subject incomplete cues that do not explicitly convey who the user should be. We have predicator incomplete cues who do not explicitly convey what the action should be. Object incomplete cues that do not explicitly convey what the intended object to act upon is. Modifier incomplete cues that do not convey exactly how the interaction should be performed. But if you have a cue that satisfies all of the functional grammar roles within your intended interaction, you now have a complete interaction cue, which is the goal. So to evaluate whether or not this framework is useful, right, because it's one thing to come up with a grammar framework, it's another thing to actually prove that it's useful, we conducted this online study. And we specifically addressed these 5 research questions. So basically, we want to know, how do users respond when they're given subject incomplete cues in the presence of multiple avatars? How do they respond when they're given predicator incomplete cues that clearly indicate objects, but not what the action should be? Object incomplete cues that clearly indicate the action, but not the object. Modifier incomplete cues that clearly indicate the action and the object, but not necessarily how. And then how do they respond when we give them complete cues? So I'm trying to be faster and I see some of you falling asleep. So if you really want the details of the experiment, please jump to the paper and read the paper. But in general, the general gist is this was an online study. We would show them a picture of the intended interaction cue. And keep in mind, the cues in most of the cases were incomplete. And then we would show them 4 video examples of a choice that they could choose, what action they thought that cue was telling them to take. So for this particular example, notice that the cue says pick it up, but it's ambiguously placed between 4 different objects that the user then can choose from for picking it up, okay? So the results were quite interesting, and they show how ambiguous incomplete cues can be. So one thing that we found was for the subject incomplete cues, when it's not clear who the subject should be, users more often than not assumed it should be them. With the predicator incomplete cues, this was an interesting finding. If you don't tell the user what to do with an object, but you tell them that they should do something, they will try to use the functionality of that object. So whether it's screwing open a water bottle or turning on a lamp, they will choose that action over moving it or looking at it. If you are telling the user to do a particular action, but you don't tell them which object to act upon, they basically will choose the object that is closest to the cue. So in our case, we would position the cue in the middle of 4 objects, and they would either choose the closest left or the closest right, and they very rarely chose the far left or far right. And then we had some modifier incomplete cues. We actually split these up. Some of them involved movements, so we would have the user moving an object in a certain way. For some reason, people tend to move objects forward more often than they do backwards. And then for the use case scenario cues or trials, basically people could choose what brightness to turn a lamp on to or how far into a book to flip it. And it's just kind of really random. But the main thing to take away here is with incomplete cues, basically users will act in different ways, okay? So incomplete cues have a big impact. What I did not include here is for complete cues. In general, complete cues, people respond more often correctly to complete cues than incomplete cues. So the overall conclusions from the paper were that completeness of cues directly will impact a user's understanding, because if you have an incomplete cue, it's ambiguous to the user what they should do. Magic can be used to analyze these, and also they can help you design your interaction cues. So as you're creating interaction cues for your applications or research, you can use Magic to assess it to basically determine if it's incomplete in some manner. We also have acknowledged that Magic does require some design experience to use effectively. So basically, if you're not an experienced interaction designer, you may struggle a little bit with being able to take that shared interaction state and use it to map the perceptual stimuli. We evaluated this through an online study using videos. We acknowledged that incompleteness should be further evaluated in actual XR. And also, we solely looked at visual cues, so future studies definitely should be looking at non-visual cues as well. And also, important to note that future research should investigate using Magic with other languages besides English, because we don't know if this framework transfers to other languages. And
Okay.
that's it.
Thank you very much, Ryan. And we have time for some questions. In fact, make that one question, and then we'll have more questions for those who remain and want to talk with all or any or all of the speakers. Questions, anyone? Questions? Okay, I'll ask a question. So I think in that video I saw someone reaching out, at least one of the examples you gave was reaching out for the cup, and it's getting picked up not using the handle, but by holding the actual cup itself on the right-hand side over there, right?
Yes.
And so I can see that either as pick up the cup, period, or pick up the cup. Don't use the handle, pick up the cup by holding it on the side, right? And what should my take on that be?
Well, so keep in mind that here we've presented you with an incomplete cue,
Mhm,
right?
right.
So technically, any of these four options could be the right option.
But what if you gave me that cue, the hand picking up the cup? Is that pick it up, or is it pick it up not using the handle?
So for clarity, that's a response, not a cue.
But let's say that were
that was
were
the
what
cue.
you actually showed me.
I see. So you're asking, like, how would we cue that up, basically?
If you basically showed me that picture
Right.
and said, "What is this showing me? What's the cue? Tell me what I'm supposed to
what
do."
the intended interaction would
right.
be. I see.
Yeah.
Right. Yeah. So in that case, to be clear, if
Mhm.
if to satisfy the interaction constraint that the system is
Right.
expecting
Uh-huh.
is simply to pick up the cup anyway, whether it's by the handle or the
Right.
proper cup, right? Then basically any type of cue would probably work, right? But to your point, if I wanted you to specifically pick up the cup not using the handle,
Right.
there would have to be some type of explicit modifier that would
Ah.
basically say, like, not using the handle
Right.
or grabbing the side of the cup
Right.
to be more
But
explicit.
if you gave me that image, that video, right?
But the problem is that's not a cue, right?
Okay.
So that's a response, like how you would act. Does that make sense?
In this context, yes. But I'm just saying that, if you gave me that video and said, "Okay, here, go and do it," right?
I see. So if that
If
video
that
itself
actually
was,
were the cue,
right,
yeah.
right. So let's assume that we took that video and put it up as a 2D plane
Yeah,
inside
yeah,
the VR scenario, and
Right.
you could look at it. Then I think in that case we're probably cueing pretty strongly that you should pick it up from the side of the cup
Mhm.
and not using the handle, right?
Mhm.
Because we're giving you a pretty explicit
Right.
interaction to relay.
Well-
But again, the first thing for Magic and the most important is you start with what the system is expecting you to do.
Right.
So if the system is expecting you not to use that handle,
Right.
that needs to be conveyed in that intended interaction, which
Right.
then means that you need some type of perceptual stimuli
Mhm.
to convey that.
Maybe you need more than that.
that is true.
Okay.
You might need more than that.
Okay, so I'm monopolizing this. Nobody else has raised their hand to go and ask a question. And so what we'll do then is we're done. Thank you very much for coming. And I think all the speakers will hopefully stick around. So if people have come up with questions, especially for the other three, then please ask them. And thank you very much for attending. We'll see you tomorrow.